Welcome to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I'm your host, Simone Morris, and I have a passion for empowering others to take responsibility for their careers. Yes, I've written several books on owning your career and am loving hosting this podcast. This podcast is for you if you're willing to make a shift to the driver's seat in your career. We feature leaders who inspire, empower, and motivate you for consistent career action for results. Please continue to join us every Sunday when a new episode is released. Let's get into this week's show. Greetings. My name is Simone Morris, host of the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. I want to say a big shout out to our regular listeners. We're so grateful that you continue to listen to the message about being in the driver's seat for your career and that you take away tips that you can apply directly to your career from the leaders who join me on the show each week to share their career story, plus tips and resources, again, for you to apply to your career so that, in essence, you can be in the driver's seat for your career. I remember it was in 2012 that I first heard the message, Simone, your career is your responsibility. And I remember thinking, why didn't I know that before? It was said to me by a boss who disappointed me, a boss who I had expectations to really go to bat for me and to really be a good sponsor for me. Let me say that all bosses are not automatically your sponsor, your champion, etc. And you need to know how to read the room and pick up on the cues. So I remember there was a conversation, and I can't remember specifically what prompted the conversation, but what I do remember is that the comment, your career is your responsibility, stuck with me from that day forward. And whenever I have instances in my career where I feel disappointed, I shine the light back to myself saying, Simone, where did you bumble and stumble in this instance? Because somehow you got it twisted and you believe that the other person is responsible for your happiness and for the career outcome that you desire. So listeners, this is a personal platform for me. I don't want anyone to ever feel or forget that your career is your responsibility. It's critical, really, to owning your career. It is critical. And so, lest I forget, lest you forget, listeners, it is critical. So for those who are new to the show, my name is Simone Morris, and I'm a career coach. I'm an author. I'm a speaker. I'm a writer, a freelance writer. I do a number of things. I'm a consultant, and my focus is really around empowering people to be in the driver's seat in their careers. Typically, the people that are drawn to me are women. So women, I claim you that I empower women to be in the driver's seat for their careers. But men that are listening do know that I am not saying no to you. I'm just saying that usually when I show up to speak or I hear from women. So if you're a man that's listening to the show or, non-conforming gender, and you want to reach out to me, please do so. We have a group on LinkedIn for the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. You can always email me as well or set up a call. It's careerbreakthroughcall.com. to connect with me and talk career talk, that is. At any rate, this is what I do for a living, and I'm so passionate, and I am constantly reminded by my clients when I see the light turn on for them that, aha, I have not been operating in my zone of genius. I have not been operating from a driver's seat position. In fact, I have been operating from a passenger seat. And now you have empowered me to take the keys and to begin my journey, restart my journey. So it is my desire that you take tips from this show, from my story, my experience, my bumbles and stumbles, because listeners, I have had a lot of bumbles and stumbles, and I continue to have bumbles and stumbles. I just have learned how to perhaps pick myself up quicker and get back into the driver's seat and steer and steer along the road, move along the journey. And I have tried many different experiences to do that. So one of the questions I asked for questions on social media. So if you didn't get an opportunity to answer questions or to post your questions, you can still post questions directly to me in our LinkedIn group. You can post questions there and I will pick them up from the LinkedIn group and answer them on the show. So one of the questions that came in was, how do you know when it's time to leave corporate America? How do you know when it's time to leave corporate America? And that's a very good question because I did leave corporate America. I left in 2013, but long before I left, there were seeds, there were writings on the wall that it was time to go. I have to tell you a little bit of my background to answer the question. So I was one of those people who used to have a job every 2 years. In some cases, I had a new job every year. At any rate, at some point it got to, I had a job for 5 years and my family was just like, whoa, that is fantastic. She's staying. And then I got comfortable. Then I got another job. That job I stayed for 15 plus years and I overstayed my welcome. I stayed there too long. I know that wholeheartedly now. But at the time, something was just keeping me stuck. And I would say it's my comfortability, not wanting to move away from the status quo, not wanting to rock the boat, and fear of the unknown. Fear will keep us stuck. Fear will keep you from not owning your career, quite honestly. So I was fearful. And so it took a lot of work, personal work, for me to decide, I'm going to bet on Simone and I'm going to step out of the corporate rat race, if you will. So I believe that our bodies gives us cues that something is amiss. So for me, I began to notice what wasn't happening in my career. So notice what is happening or not happening in your career and get really clear on if that makes you happy or not. So for me, I began to notice that I was less than happy with my career. And that was way before I got the message in 2012 that my career was in my responsibility. And I began to do things external. So if your external activities, you're doing so much that you can survive with your internal day job, internal corporate activities, then that is a cue to pick up on. So if you're feeling more fulfilled when you leave the office on the weekend on Friday and you're doing everything and you are just joyful, etc., and then you are doom and gloom on Sunday night when it's time to return to the office on Monday, you're like, is it Friday? That's a cue to pick up on. So I would say pay attention to the cues that you receive. So for me, one of the cues was I was less than fulfilled with what I was doing. I felt like there was greater things ahead for me if I would just jump. But I didn't want to jump because I didn't know where I was jumping to. And so I remember an outburst. And that's another cue. If you are acting in a way that you do not normally act, pay attention because it could be out of frustration, disappointment, whatever it is, you could be acting out. So for me, I became less than patient with lip service. So when leaders, I had interactions with the leaders who I perceived were offering up lip service, it would really irritate me, anger me. And so the old Simone would not say anything. I would think it, but I wouldn't say it. And so I found myself beginning to speak up. And the package wasn't pretty. It wasn't always pretty. It wasn't always a pretty package for confrontation or speaking up. So that was another thing. I was acting differently than I normally would act. It finally came to the point where I felt that I have got to get out of here. I just didn't have a plan. And so one of the things that I did, and if you Google me, I believe it was socialhire.com that I wrote an article for, and we can look that up for the show notes. But I took a sabbatical. I asked for a sabbatical. Praise God, praise Jesus, praise whomever you praise. The answer was yes. And it was unpaid. And I just felt like I needed a lifeline. I needed a life jacket to just give me a pause. So I hit pause on my career and I took a 3-month sabbatical, which was amazing. So the other thing I would say, if you're not ready to jump ship, find a timeout for yourself. How can you get a timeout? I believe that companies are more open to sabbaticals these days, especially since there's a focus on mental health and really taking care of employees. There's the great resignation that's happening. And so it's a prime opportunity if you feel that you need a timeout to regroup and to figure out your path forward, whether it's to move into a different function in your existing company, whether it's to ask to work for someone else. So you could be moving to a different boss. It doesn't have to be that you're exiting that company, or it could be that you're exiting. It could be a win-win if you decide to exit the organization. So it doesn't have to be a win-lose situation. So, but the point is, you can take a pause and get yourself together. So for me, before I took my pause, I was having a conversation with a coach. I hired a career coach to really help me get clear, like something is amiss. I need to figure out what I want to do. And what happened in the career coaching conversation was I discovered coaching. I discovered that coaching was something that I really loved to do, and I was doing it without any training or pay. And I decided that, I wonder what this experience would be like. So when I took my sabbatical from work, I enrolled in the Coaches Training Institute, and I began the journey to become a coach. So when you raise your hand to be a coach, there's a lot of inner work that goes on, because you got to get your stuff together before you can be helping other people. So even if it's not that you decide to be a coach, a life coach, a career coach, whatever coach, there are opportunities for you to do some inner work. So I would say if you're feeling off kilter, feeling like you're ready for your next career chapter, one of the things you could do is to really take time to work on yourself and to pour into yourself to gain clarity about who you are. And one of those things might be to hire a coach to work with, to sort through what's going on here. What do I really desire to be happy? So for me, I worked through that process, and I was called back to work early. So I went back early, and I received the validation that there's a change that's necessary. There was a change that was necessary. So me jumping back in validated for me that, no, I really do need to jump out, and for a longer time. So my days were numbered, I would say, once I came back in. I didn't immediately make the shift. But by the way, listeners, when you're trying to make career shifts, you really need to make sure that you have a fund, a take care of you fund, just in case. A take care of you fund, so that you can be putting money into that, so that you can have choices and not be motivated by money to jump back into the next thing. So in terms of deciding if it's your time, my answer is pay attention to the cues that are happening around you, and listen to yourself, listen to your heart, take the time to listen, because you will know when it's time to go. And most importantly, bet on yourself. Now, back to my story, I went back in, and I knew I should not have gone back in, but I went back in. This time I had a medical issue that caused me to have a leave of absence. And after that experience, I knew that was yet another cue to get my attention, because I was not paying attention, or I was paying attention, but I wasn't listening. So pay attention to the cues and listen to the cues, and you will know when it is time to move on from corporate America, if that is what you so choose. I have learned a lot along the way. Since my exit from corporate America, I've written 3 books, and uh, singularly. And my first book was about setting goals. The second book is The Power of Owning Your Career, because that sat on my heart so much that I know there are so many people who are just not happy with their careers. And part of the problem is that they are not taking ownership to move to a place of happiness. So that's the first book. And the second book is 52 Tips for Owning Your Career. So the Power of Owning Your Career book is about the formula for owning your career and leadership stories, similar to this podcast, similar to the podcast where I bring leaders on and I ask them about their stories. Great leaders are in the book. I really enjoyed that experience, which is actually the catapult for this podcast, which is going on 8 seasons. At any rate, the third book, 52 Tips for Owning Your Career, are more tangible tips that you can take to really turn your career around. So thank you to the listener who put in the question. I believe it was Bridget McGowan, actually, who asked the question. Someone asked the question and she passed it along to me because this is my zone, about how you know when to leave. And to the person that asked that question, you know when to leave because you will not be able to turn your back on saying no to leaving, because things will just keep cropping up until you make the decision to bet on yourself and to leap forward. You should also check out the book from Shonda Rhimes, The Year of Yes. I think that's a great resource to really leverage. There is one other question that came in that I did want to answer. What do you do when you have a bad boss or a boss that's not supporting you in the way that you desire? My answer to that question is, if you have a boss that is not supporting you in the way that you need, you have to decide what you want to do about it. And you do have options. You can stay in it. You can confront the situation head on and stay in it. You can leave the organization. Some people do that. And you can leave the boss to another department. There are options available to you if you have a situation that does not work for you. What is important is that you take on the role of finding what is going to work for you. So that means you've got to do the work to figure out, what do I want? What do I have in this situation that I really don't want? Because you don't want to repeat that. So do an audit of what is working well and what is not working well. What do you wish that you had? And then use that list to find the boss that will work well for you. Have conversations, do the networking, do the relationship building to find a boss that is in your corner, is a champion for you. And by the way, sometimes we don't ask bosses for what we need. So it could be us where we feel this is a bad boss, but are you asking the boss for what you need? And are you playing back to the boss? Listen, are you aware that you are not supporting me in projects, in meetings? I'm not sure if you're aware. Here's an example of that. Can we have a conversation about that? So bringing to attention the fact that this situation is not cool. I'm not feeling safe. I'm not feeling seen, heard, supported. I would love to talk to you about that and what we do about it. So that's the confronting the situation, having the conversation about that. The other thing is really looking around, look around the organization, do some qualitative interviews and find out, or what I meant to say is secure some qualitative data. And that is talking to other employees about what they do, who they work for, how they're supported. And pay attention to the leaders who are respected and liked and things like that. And see your way to that new leader, working for that new leader. Build a relationship, build a bridge to making that jump. Get people in your corner so that they are speaking for you and you're not pushing by yourself to secure that new opportunity. In the world of project management, that's called stakeholder management. So there's that. And then there's the external, of course. You don't have to stay in it. So if you're in toxicity, hope I said that word, toxicity. I hope I said that word. Sometimes my Jamaican heritage comes up in conversations. At any rate, if you're sitting in toxic mess, you get to decide whether you stay in it, because there is a physical and mental impact. So if you have a bad boss, let's get to work on how you turn that tide around. So as always, I'm here for my listeners. I appreciate you so much. If you want to talk to me about a career situation that you need assistance in, please feel free to book a call at careerbreakthroughcall.com, and you can get on my calendar and we can have a conversation. It's a 30-minute session. We can have a conversation about what's happening and how to turn that around. So would love to chat with you. Thank you for listening to me this week. We will return with a guest next week, but I wanted to pause so that you can hear my voice, answer some of the questions that come in. Again, keep the questions coming in because I'm happy to talk about those questions with you. I am working on the next iteration of 52 Tips for Owning Your Career. So a second edition of that book, because I've learned so much since that has happened. And I want to make sure that I continue to update the book so that you have the resources, you have Simone's perspective and guidance that you can leverage in your career. Thank you for listening. If you're listening to the first time, we've got over 100 episodes that you can go through and get your career fix. And if you're new, go through our library. If you've been along for the journey, I thank you. I'm grateful for you. Let me hear from you. Show up and meet us in the LinkedIn after party group where you can talk about owning your career. So I'd love to see you over there. I'd love to hear from you. But again, you have my gratitude for being a loyal listener to the Power of Owning Your Career podcast. Go be a driver this week in your career. And listen, tell me about it. Drop me a line. I'd love to hear about it. Have a great day, everybody.
I sincerely hope that you enjoyed this week's empowering career story on the podcast. If you did, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor. Wherever you listen to the podcast, be sure that you are subscribing and that you rate and review the podcast. It's so important as we continue to spread the word of career empowerment. In addition, you can head over to the LinkedIn platform and join the Power of Owning Your Career discussion group. There you can have access to the guests who have been on the podcast, as well as others listening to the podcast, as well as myself, where we can continue the conversation. I hope to see you on that platform. You can also email me at pooyc@SimoneMorris.com if you have a suggestion for guest or a message that you want me to hear personally. Thanks so much, and make it an inspiring, empowering week in your career.